So thank you all for coming, and we are starting the last session today on the practical side of SLAPPs and the discussion with journalists and representatives of journalists organizations who are working with SLAPPs. Today with us we have Cecilia Anesi, who is the Executive Director of Italian Investigative Reporting Center, RIPI, which publishes the online magazine IrpiMedia. As a journalist, she leads the sub-newsrooms focus on organized crime in Mediterranean. Cecilia has worked on various transnational investigations, such as Daphne Project, Open Lux, Swiss Secrets, Russian Asset Tracker, and Narco Files. With us, we have also Catherine Belton, who is the international investigative reporter for the Washington Post, reporting on Russia, and the author of Putin's People, a New York Times Critics Book of 2020. She worked previously as the Moscow correspondent for the Financial Times and as the newspaper legal correspondent. And finally, we have with us today Bojan Elek, who is the project manager of Kirk, dedicated to strengthening the newsroom sustainability with a particular focus on combating SLAPPs. Through this work, he contributes to the efforts of Kirk and other independent media outlets to protect the integrity of investigative journalists and freedom of expression in Serbia's increasingly challenging media environment. Bojan has over 10 years of experience in civil society sector, where he worked on public policy research in areas of security, European integration, and the rule of law. He holds a journalist degree from the Faculty of Political Science in Belgrade and has pursued further studies in the United States, Hungary, and United Kingdom. Thank you all very much for coming. And if we could start with your short stories, short presentations, that would be perfect. Let us start with Cecilia.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to the European Institute for organizing this. My story as a reporter overlaps, of course, with the newsroom because all those SLAPPs that we have been facing, and some of them I face them directly as a reporter, but I'm also involved by being the legal representative with also all of the SLAPPs that are not, for investigations I've written myself. And as a rapid calculation, we currently have 10 cases ongoing. Some are criminal charges because in Italy defamation it's a crime, and some of them are civil litigations. We actually also have some cases that are both at the same time, and a specific case that is actually chasing us since a few years, that originated from the Swiss Secret investigation that you mentioned, Pauliina. It's in my bio, and then it's part of an international collaboration. And basically, we have this case against us in 4 jurisdictions, and it's definitely a very cross-border case that obviously doesn't only impact IrpiMedia or myself. In that case, I was also the reporter on the investigation, but it also impacts our colleagues and other newsrooms. Actual, media entities in 4 different jurisdictions. So it's obviously very impactful because it's been going on for a few years. Just 3 weeks ago, I was acquitted in a criminal trial that was going on for 6 years and a half on defamation. It was an Italian story that we produced before opening the media. Just a very short note, like IRPI as a Center for Investigative Reporting has been existing since 2012. We actually know Kirk very well. We've been collaborating numerous times. And we're sort of the 2 most SLAPP newsrooms that are part of OSIS-IRPI as member centers. Unfortunately, like Serbia, Italy seems to be some of the European countries that are most most involved with SLAPPs. And why do I mention this case about this specific trial? Is because it was the only SLAPP that ever ended in trial. Like the majority of the criminal cases against us, luckily, are stopped before becoming a trial. So we get investigated by the judiciary, but in the majority of cases, through the work that we can do with our lawyers, we can prove that it's a SLAPP, or it's, there is no the case needs to be dismissed, basically. And the majority of cases, we actually have success in that case. So the prosecutors themselves ask for a dismissal. But sometimes you end up being investigated by prosecutors that have a different opinion. And for example, in this case that lasted 7 years, as I mentioned, there were 3 different public prosecutors that changed. And the first 2 thought that there was, enough space for them to think that we should have been set to trial. That's why we were trialed for many years. And then last month, a new prosecutor came on the case, and he really twisted the case, saying that our work was absolutely not defamatory. It was well done. It was respecting all the principles of journalism. We had acted in a respectful way, and also basically what we had done, it was good investigative journalism and not defamation. And it's obviously it was a big relief, but at the same time, it's weird for the fact that you are tried for many years. It obviously is also expensive for citizens because it's a long trial with many witnesses on. And then until, that very moment in which there is the actual hearing of the trial, that you could actually be sent to jail. So you have to operate and work while having that sort of awareness in your head. And this is just to mention a type of stress that reporters are under. But for us, the problem with SLAPPs is not only a matter of psychological pressure and worry, but it's also very much for the media itself a huge sort of logistical problem, because the amount of time that our reporters have to dedicate to work with the lawyers for defense, either it's already on trial, either it's pre-trial, either it's in one or more jurisdictions, it's an immense amount of time that unfortunately it's not sort of taken care of, because the majority of also the NGOs that are trying to support journalists in that regard might be very helpful in paying legal expenses, but so far there is no mechanism, not even a mechanism of compensation, because in the trial I just mentioned, the judge is not, deciding that, ruling that the slapper, because at that point you can actually call it a slapper, has been, should at least, repay the legal expenses. So, and let alone the compensation for the time of the journalist. So that's I hope in short, the situation we are in and that we operate in. We also have, for example, I mentioned civil litigations. We have one civil litigation that is asking us 150,000 euros damages. And that would mean if we lose the full of it or a part of it, that the newsroom will have serious issues in operating. It's like you actually risk to, bankrupt. And I know that there are newsrooms that have even bigger amounts that are being asked. But either ways, the civil litigations have lately become a sort of new weapon that have been used. I'll add another short thing, and then I will let my colleagues speak. One of the problems that we've been facing alongside the SLAPPs is the request to remove content. Italy has been used a lot in Europe as a sort of playground for this, due to the fact that a recent regulation has strengthened the right to be forgotten through the Cartavia law. I don't know if you heard of that, but basically what it sparked is the fact that we not just our newsroom, but the majority of newsrooms in our country are asked on a daily basis to remove content. You basically end up having to hire an extra lawyer just to go through all these requests because very few of them are legitimate. But those, of course, need to be dealt with the maximum care because otherwise the person would have the right to sue you and win. But the majority of them are actually just completely groundless, but are wasting a lot of our time and energy because we have to go through them. And they're used to menace the newsrooms to take content down. Alongside these, a lot of these individuals through law firms are just alerting Google, and Google is taking in a completely deliberate way is taking content off. So it's basically de-indexing our web pages without even providing any more information on the specific URL. So we just get an alert from Google saying an article of yours has been removed because in breach, alleged, I will but it's in breach of EU privacy law or in breach of the right to be forgotten. So this is a sort of mixed attack that we get and that we have to juggle with while doing reporting.
Thank you so much for sharing. Bojan, would you like to go next?
Hello to everyone. Thanks for the invitation and thanks, Cecilia, for this useful overview of your cases. I think we are facing somewhat similar situation in Serbia. So I'm from Kirk, which is a crime and corruption reporting network, which is the most widely read investigative newsroom in Serbia. And for those of you who don't know, but Serbia currently, as it is, unfortunately, it's a captured state with essentially an organized criminal group that has captured all state institutions. And unlike in some European countries, where, for example, you can count on due process and the proper court handling of SLAPP cases, unfortunately, in Serbia, we cannot even count on that. So the situation in fighting these pressures is much more difficult, I would say. But on top of SLAPPs, the issue is also that because we investigate the highest level of organized crime and corruption, which in Serbia is basically intertwined with politics, we have very powerful and rich people coming after us. Some of them have hundreds of millions of euros in assets. And using the peculiarities of the Serbian legal system, they can sue us almost indefinitely for a very low amount of money and completely exhaust us in this process. Kirk at some point in 2024 had 19 active cases, SLAPP lawsuits, and we are still even the record holder in Serbia. And now today we have 13 active cases. And like I mentioned, here are really powerful people, including, for example, former Minister of Defense or head of the intelligence agency, or people linked to the regime pretty much. On top of that, in Serbia, since a year and a half ago, we've had this really big popular uprising, I want to say, that is led by the pro-democratic forces, led by the student movement in Serbia. And for the year and a half, we had constant ongoing protests and demanding for the proper investigation of this accident that started everything at the train station in Novi Sad, where 16 people died due to corrupt dealings having to do with this Belgrade-Budapest rail, if you follow the infrastructure projects in Europe. So now the people are demanding the accountability and justice in the streets, and our mission really aligns well with it. And then meaning that the regime has taken out everything that they have against the journalists and those critical voices, including us. So on top of SLAPPs, we have threats, intimidation, police officers installing illegal spyware on our phones. We have constant smear campaigns, digital breaches of our security, attempts at phishing. 3 of my colleagues had their apartments broken into. So it's an all-out attack on journalists. And if you follow the indices, international indices, for example, Reporters Without Borders, Freedom Press Index, Serbia has consistently ranked lowest in its history. This year was lower than the previous one, and the previous one was already the lowest one in history. So, and any other report is pretty much calling Serbia a hybrid regime and autocracy. So yeah, this is the environment in which we have to do all of our work, so investigate organized crime and also fight SLAPPs. And needless to say, we had to come up with some creative ways to do it in an environment that is not very conducive to do so. So maybe I'll talk about it later at a later stage during the presentation. But now maybe just to kind of give a quick rundown. So we have the most frequent charges, of course, are defamation charges. But we also have some private criminal charges for the alleged illegal use of gathering, processing of personal data. So we had even the most critical case currently is against us by a Serbian judge who seeks 10 months prison sentence for 4 of our journalists. So a Serbian judge, only because we use her name and some information from her public engagement and put it in our database. She claims we have no right to investigate her. And then on top of that, we also have commercial cases in commercial courts where fees are also exorbitantly high. We get sued by private companies. And then obviously other media organizations in Serbia are facing similar threats. I don't want to say that we are the most attacked, but it feels like as if the whole entire independent media and journalistic system, activists, everybody is exposed to risks like this. So maybe I'll stop here and then I'll see where I can contribute more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bojan. And now, Catherine, if you could share with us the story of your SLAPP story, I would be very grateful.
Thanks so much for having me on this panel. It's really interesting and horrific to hear the stories of my colleagues and all the trauma that they're still going through. I was very lucky in comparison. It's an old story by now, but it helped raise awareness of the problem of SLAPPs, at least in the UK, because I faced lawsuits from 4 separate Russian billionaires and then from the Russian state oil company Rosneft, all at the same time after my book Putin's People came out in 2021. It was very clear to us that these were SLAPPs. Basically, Roman Abramovich was leading the charge. He made a complaint soon after my book was published, but our lawyers responded. We said, we gave full opportunity to comment prior to publication. We sent the email showing where the spokesman had responded saying fine and everything. So we were really surprised when all of a sudden, just before the statute of limitations was about to expire a year after publication, all of a sudden Abramovich is making a big statement to the press saying, I've made a number of false and defamatory claims and he's going to sue me personally and HarperCollins. And after him, then all these other Russian oligarchs and the state oil company basically jumped on the bandwagon. We're still not sure what was driving it, whether it was a coincidence or not that the Abramovich lawsuit and then all the others that rapidly followed was because the late and very great Alexei Navalny was quoting from my book in his video about Putin's palace on the Black Sea, which may have kind of drawn the Kremlin's attention. There was a former associate of Abramovich who said that basically he'd been told to discredit my book by any means necessary. And so it was a really difficult and traumatic process because I'd spent 7 years working on this book. It had been lawyered prior to publication. We thought we'd done everything, including with Abramovich's spokesperson. So it was really shocking and soul-destroying to find yourself on the receiving end of all these lawsuits. And for me, having spent 7 years on it, it just felt to me that, all my career was going to go down the drain, that they would try to discredit me and the book. But fortunately, this is a story that has a silver lining, and that's because these very deep-pocketed individuals went all out. And it became very clear that this was a pylon and that it was connected most likely to the Kremlin, because all these billionaires, what was most touchy for them was sort of claims that they had an association with the Kremlin. And, it basically meant that it kind of raised awareness of the problem of SLAPPs in the UK, because it had been kind of an under the radar thing before. There was also a similar case where a trio of three Kazakh billionaires was suing my colleague Tom Burgess, with whom I used to work at the FT, for a book that he wrote, also for the same publishing house, HarperCollins, called Kleptopia. And so basically, through the efforts of the Kremlin and these three Kazakh billionaires, we managed to kind of raise awareness of the problem of SLAPPs, because we found that, there have been so many newsrooms in the UK who had just been censoring themselves all the time, because the minute you get a legal complaint from a very rich individual, especially someone like Abramovich, very often the newspapers were just caving to their demands. Like, for instance, the Times of London had retracted kind of something pertaining to Abramovich's purchase of a yacht, which was actually information that had been provided by Abramovich and his associates as part of earlier commercial proceedings in London. And yet the Times of London, because it didn't want to deal with any legal risk, was just like, okay, Mr. Abramovich will take that out. So we had kind of a flurry of activity in the UK. There was awareness about how basically London is a center for SLAPPs, because, our legislation, unfortunately, is still stacked in favor of the deep-pocketed individuals. We have truth defense, we have public interest defense, but if you're taking the public interest defense, basically the legal proceedings are so long and drawn out, and the journalist is put on trial. It can cost millions and millions of pounds, which means that no really journalistic organization can essentially afford to take the risk. And because of the awareness of kind of how the odds are stacked in favor stacked against journalists, there was some action taken by the Parliament, and they decided to introduce an anti-SLAPP provision for anyone writing about economic crimes. Unfortunately, this was a very imperfect law, because again, the onus is on the journalist to prove that the accuser is pursuing the case to intimidate and to harass the journalist. And that's a very subjective viewpoint, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, for a journalist to prove that in court. The Justice Ministry in the UK conducted several consultations and hearings about what designates a SLAPP, like whether there are several cases filed from multiple jurisdictions, which was the case from Abramovich, whether the other definition of a SLAPP was whether the claimant was sort of pursuing exaggerated meanings, which actually weren't in the contents of any book or article, which again was the case with Abramovich, and whether again whether or not they were pursuing kind of multiple claims at the same time, not just from different jurisdictions, but also kind of different types of claims, like data protection at the same time as defamation, to kind of hedge their bets just in case they didn't kind of meet the bar on a defamation claim. So unfortunately, things have improved in terms of awareness in the UK. But we have this very imperfect law, which is solely pertaining to economic crimes, and it's a law which basically is unwinnable for journalists, because it's impossible to prove something so subjective as to the intention of the claimant. And as a result, unfortunately, London is still a playground for these types of claims, particularly because legal fees in London are so many times higher than in the rest of Europe. Journalists, again, as with the other cases we can still be liable for the costs. So it's a really difficult environment. And I have several very good colleagues at the moment who are just stymied by these claims, like they're paralyzed. There's a very good journalist at a very big UK TV company who, he is kind of at the cutting edge of writing about things like the Panama Papers and other ICIJ type work. And he is facing a completely kind of obnoxious claim from somebody who is already notorious for filing slaps. And yet, because he's been so busy dealing with this nuisance lawsuit, he hasn't been able to publish anything for the last 3 or 4 years, and his case won't come to court till later this year. And then I also know of a Swedish colleague who is now on the receiving end of claims from some very rich Middle Eastern barons who are, who are pursuing him and his colleagues, even though they're in London, even though their Swedish TV program is, it's not going to be viewed by anyone in the UK, maybe, but they can still try to get jurisdiction by just arguing that maybe 1 or 2 people saw this TV program there. So it's still completely ridiculous. The odds are really still stacked against journalists. There was a slight improvement in the environment, but mainly it was due to the war in Ukraine and the fact that many of the Russian oligarchs in particular who'd been pursuing these types of activities were on the sanctions list, which made it much more difficult for them to pursue cases. So yeah, I'm really sorry to hear about the cases of my colleagues, and it really does seem like a horrific environment, and it's time that we could be able to do something about that. So thank you, and I'm very glad to hear everyone else.
Thank you all so much for your stories and for sharing them with us. To all that are listening to us, if you have any questions to our speakers, please share them in the chat so I can read them for you. And as we don't have any questions yet from our participants, I would like to ask you a question about damages, because there is quite a significant difference when it comes to common law and civil law countries. So in Italy, in Serbia, as I understand, it's rather the number of cases that is creating the chilling effect on journalists than the damages that the slappers are requesting for. And in case of UK, and as I can expect in Catherine's case, probably the damages that the slappers were asking for were creating the chilling effect themselves. And if you could elaborate a bit on the damages that were requested by those who targeted you with slap.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't even the damages that they were pursuing, because essentially, I don't think any of them had kind of actually put a figure on the sum in damages that they were seeking, but they were seeking a withdrawal of the book in its entirety from the shelves after 7 years' work. But what made the kind of pursuing these type of cases prohibitive for any journalist was the fact that the legal costs of defending them are so high. We believed, I was very lucky because HarperCollins, they agreed to provide a very robust defense, and it's a big, deep-pocketed publishing house, and they were insured. But I think if it was any other publishing house, they wouldn't have been able to do it. They would have just had to withdraw the book. And but I mean, even to defend a very strong public interest case in the case of Abramovich. He was pursuing 2 cases simultaneously, one in the UK and the other in Australia, where he didn't have any business, so he had no reputation to protect, and yet he'd still filed a claim there because the libel laws there were even more skewed in favor of the rich than they are in the UK. And the case according to my lawyers, if we had continued the case with Abramovich, then it would have cost at least £5 million to defend in the UK, and then another £5 million, perhaps more, in Australia. You know, we believe that we had a very strong case, but when it's kind of a lottery, and you're dealing with a rich oligarch who's very well skilled in all kinds of litigation processes, and you know, if I'd woken up on the day of giving testimony and had a bad day, then that's it. We would have lost £10 million and also had to pay the other side's costs. So it was a lot of money. And basically what happened with the Abramovich case, because we had a preliminary hearing on the meaning of the passages complained of, and the judge found that he had been exaggerating some of his claims. And so after that hearing, his lawyers came and basically offered a settlement in which they said, we would make this go away if you agreed to make some very minor changes. And the changes were so minor in the sense that they didn't alter the meaning of what we had written, and it would only be clear to a really close read. We agreed because it was too risky to potentially face £10 million more in our own costs and then perhaps double that for Abramovich. And so, for instance, like the main claim that Abramovich was unhappy about was that in the book it said 3 former associates of Abramovich said that Abramovich had bought Chelsea Football Club on Putin's orders in order to win power and influence in the UK. And in the event, the settlement that we agreed to was to change the wording of that really tinily by saying 3 of Abramovich's former associates said Putin may have asked him to buy the club in order to acquire power and influence in the UK. And then there was a denial on top of a denial that was already there. And so we agreed to that because it didn't change the substance of the book. But the fact was, this was still a time just before the Ukraine war broke out, before sanctions. Abramovich was still very powerful in the UK. He still had lots of connections in the media. His PR person was going around and threatening journalists to write their version of the settlement. And so there was lots of media in the UK who were saying that we'd agreed that we'd written false and defamatory claims in the book, which just wasn't true. So it was more a reputational thing, which has since been rectified. But really, I think beyond the damages for any UK journalists, it's purely the costs of fighting such lawsuits, because lawyers here charge thousands of pounds an hour. It's horrific.
Yeah, definitely. Let's be honest, when the cost of the defense is £5 million, you don't need any additional damages to ask for. Would you, Bojan or Cecilia, like to add anything on that?
Sure. You want to
You
go
go,
first?
you go, Cecilia.
Are you sure? Okay, that's it. So, I mean, fortunately, lawyers are expensive, I think, in any side of the world. But fortunately, in Italy, we do have pro bono lawyers for our paper, which doesn't mean they're for free, though. I think we need to have a distinction on that because, for example, in Italy, it's illegal for a lawyer to work completely for free. So they still have to charge something. And then, of course, on top of that, you've got taxes that you have to pay to the court, especially in civil litigations. And then, as I mentioned, there is all the time that you have to invest on it. And then if it lasts for years, still, although it's not like you're not paying them millions, it's still going to be thousands of euros. But the main issue, especially when it comes to claims, well, for example, in the multi-jurisdictional case that I mentioned, we have been asked 1 million euros in Spain, an amount, and just like it's not a precise amount, but high numbers in Florida as well. And we were asked about 200,000 euros in Italy so this is one person that is chasing us in different jurisdictions. Then in France, this person went for criminal law, and initially went for civil litigation, and then it sort of understood that it wasn't going anywhere, and it came back with a criminal charge, with a criminal lawsuit that ended up with a criminal charge. So just to say that there is one person that has enough money, and it's not a Russian oligarch, but still it's a broker for, it's a person who's been in the past charged for being a money launderer for the Italian mafia. So it's a hinged figures, let's say, that comes from the businessman side of things and has enough money to pay, in this case, for example, for one of the best lawyers in Florida. So I really agree with Catherine. It's a lottery. You don't really know how things go and unfold. And for us, I mean, between this case and others, we more or less we don't have millionary requests, but we have 150,000 euros here, 200,000 there. And I mean, if you pair it up, it's around our budget. So it's as scary as it can be a 2 million euros request to, I don't know, large legacy media. So of course there is chilling effect. And I think there is more chilling effect with these cases than with the criminal investigations, because of course none of us love to be treated as a criminal and charged by police and having to go to police station and telling your family that you might end up in jail for 3 months. But the problem with the civil litigation is that the big risk is that the money that especially independent media have to fundraise for can end from one day to another if you lose one of these cases. So there is totally a chilling effect. I mean, even us that we are, super independent, we do have sometimes to stop and think between the management and the editorial directors, like the editors in chief, are we going for the story or not? And if we're going for the story, we do like one more week of legal checks with our lawyers, perhaps, just to be sure. One of the huge issues, I think it would be very important to work upon this in Europe. And by Europe, I mean also countries like Serbia, like we don't have to just think of Europe in terms of, or the UK, not like only the countries that are in the European Union. It's insurance. Because unfortunately, we cannot insure the media, for example, in Italy. I know that colleagues in the Netherlands can, for example. So we do have insurance, like personal individual insurance as journalists. Although, and here I link to what Bojan said earlier, I didn't mention that we do have criminal charges against it that in the majority of cases defamation, but in some cases there is also other type of crimes. For example, one of our reporters it's currently under investigation and charged with illegal access of digital data, because basically he did an investigation proving how the website of one part of the judiciary wasn't protecting properly their data, like anybody could just access that. And instead of saying thank you for the investigation, they charged him with illegally accessing their website to show that. In that case, the insurance that we have does not cover him because the insurance says, oh, but we only cover you for defamation. So obviously that's a big issue, because if you're sued for illegally accessing information, if you're sued for damaging, like it's like aggressive behavior, there is various things that they come up with sometimes. And in that case, you're not protected from the insurance. And even more importantly than that, the media, until it cannot be insured, it means that all the money can be lost. All the money of the whole media organization can be lost. So it's useless that you protect the single journalist. And also there, like, we can only insure with this individual insurance the journalists who are part of the order of journalists. Because in Italy, we have this law that was established during the fascism regime, that to be a journalist, you need to be part of the order of journalists. It's not an actual union. It's a more kind of a regulatory body. The problem being that there are very stringent criteria to become part of that. You need to have published 80 articles per year with a single newspaper, for example, and be paid for that. Now, for the majority of Italian freelancers who are young, this is just impossible. So, for example, we're in a condition in which we do have some journalists working with us who are not part of the order of journalists yet. So those are not protected by insurance. So this is just to say that there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of protection. And I think that if we could be insured like hospitals are, we would have much stronger media. Because at that point you can say, obviously we're still ensuring the best quality possible, but at least you don't have to worry that next year you might not have your budget to operate with at all anymore. So yeah, it's a huge, and I've seen going thing. I don't know if that's the case with Serbia. It would be interesting to hear, but in like until 2 years ago, the majority of the SLAPPs or of the cases were in criminal law in Italy, and now it seems that lawyers are advising that they get more chilling effect through the civil litigations.
Hi, thanks, Cecilia, for bringing some of these issues, and also Catherine. I think it's an interesting, different perspective. So maybe to touch upon several things. Definitely in Serbia, it's very cheap to sue, and it's the number or the sheer volume of simultaneous lawsuits that is kind of draining us. We did a kind of calculation that for 4,000 to 5,000 euros as a rich individual, and this is probably like the price of one dinner or a bottle of wine for some of them, they can sue us, even go to the appeals and pay all the fines and all the legal fees for 4,000 to 5,000 euros. So it's nothing for them, and for us, it's such a draining experience. Obviously, in Serbia, as a kind of associate member of the EU, so we are still negotiating for the membership in the EU, although we are moving away from it on the ground, which is it's obvious we do not have any anti-SLAPP provisions in our law, although Serbia will at some point have to transpose this European Union's anti-SLAPP directive. But there, as a member of the Council of Europe, our judges can freely and directly implement the recommendations, for example, about the factors determining SLAPPs. But our judges in Serbia, unfortunately, are very strict and formalistic. Unless there is SLAPP mentioned in the legal system, they will not go into, they don't want to even hear that there is something like SLAPP law. So what we did, for example, is to kind of try to raise awareness about these issues by doing some, let's say, unorthodox things. For example, we submitted for the second time ever in the history of Serbian legal system, the so-called amicus curiae, which doesn't exist in civil legal systems, but we asked legal professional on media law to draft an opinion, and we submitted it as an evidence in the court case. We decided that so many journalists who get sued, we don't know about that because they feel sort of ashamed for their name to be dragged as if they did something wrong when they didn't. And also, they don't even want to be part of a story because as journalists, you want to write stories. You don't want to, your name appear in news pieces. So what we did instead was that we actually extensively report on our lawsuits. So every time we get a lawsuit, every time from the courtroom where the lawsuits, where we are going through the proceedings, whatever happens, the decision is reached, and then we change our editorial strategy to some extent because we think it's really important for this to go out in public, because if you read these articles, you can see that judges do not strictly apply the law, that they wouldn't let us, for example, present our case or evidence. There were some also very problematic court decisions that we went, in the higher instances, and then we will definitely pursue the ECHR in Strasbourg if, once we exhaust all the domestic legal remedies. As a part of this kind of constant struggle and balancing act of kind of finances and your time being lost in courtrooms, we also joined Reporters Shield, which is something that functions as an insurance, what Cecilia mentioned, but it's an international, I'm not allowed to legally say it's an insurance, it's a membership-based kind of organization, but you pay a yearly premium, and then based on your risk assessment, you get covered for the costs throughout the year if any new lawsuits arise during that time. And it's run by the OCCRP and supported by the USAID grant from back in the day. So we are, I think, one of the few in Serbia who has this, because if you get sued frequently and it's you cannot kind of plan it in advance as a project-based, donation-based organization, it's very difficult to manage the costs. So this is, for example, what we use, and it's I would say at least it kind of gives you peace of mind. And also it specifically because of what Catherine mentioned about, because you can also get sued through the so-called venue shopping in London as well. It kind of also helps us with this high-risk jurisdictions where you can literally lose everything that you own if you can end up in court there. So they provide also a pre-publication legal review. Obviously, we do that as well. We provide the right of reply. We even go so far to call everybody who's mentioned in our story by phone to try to get comment from them, because we were sued previously for citing, for example, public record, for example, citing that a certain name appeared in prosecutor's charges, and then we would get sued for just quoting an official document. So we try to preemptively do anything to kind of not end up in a situation like this. But I think the most creative thing that we did was that actually we joined forces with other newsrooms in Serbia that are under SLAPP attacks. And this is BIR Serbia, so Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, and Slavko Čuruvija Foundation, which is a media foundation named after a journalist who was murdered 27 years ago, so still during Milosevic time, during transition time, and still there is zero justice in this case. So we joined forces, all of us are getting slapped, colleagues from Slavko Čuruvija Foundation, including for those who were suspect of murdering the journalist for defamation. So it's really kind of, it's what we said that is like, we get sued so much, we go to courtrooms alone, and it's so damaging and it's so sad and scary to be in a courtroom alone. These are not even big courtrooms, these are just offices, like you would see in a random Serbian court, like any office building. It's like 4 by 4 meters, and you feel so alone there. And what we started is purely out of journalistic solidarity, and other colleagues join us also. I see colleagues from International Journalists Association of Serbia. And we started showing up in courtrooms just for the journalists not to be alone. From there, because there's so many journalists in the courtroom, we started extensively reporting, and we have cases, for example, that are very critical ones, where we have 2, 3, or 4 news pieces published from the courtroom about what's happening to journalists. We also joined our forces to investigate slappers, because their point is to sue us so that we would stop investigating them. We don't do that. So we have repeated slappers. We have people who sued us 3 times. We have some powerful people who sue us every time we publish a story. We have people who sue us after we publish a news piece that we got sued by them. So we get sued for publishing that we got sued. So there is quite a lot of kind of interesting legal practice there. I guess one day when we kind of get out of this situation, somebody might can write a book about it. But yeah, there's definitely quite a lot of practices, and I think people, the regime and the plaintiffs are getting ever more creative, because they use, for example, my newsroom was also investigated for money laundering and financing of terrorism using anti-money laundering legislation. We were being, colleagues of ours had their apartments, offices broken into, raided by the police on the alleged misuse of USAID funds, just because of something that head of FBI said once back in January 2025. And it's really repressive. But then I guess the solidarity that keeps us going. And I think this is the most important finding when the situation gets tough, is the journalistic solidarity that keeps you going. And I think that who do I call? There was a question in the chat. This is who you call. You go to your colleagues, journalists, I think, and journalistic associations, and you try to do something together. And this is where I'll stop.
Thank you, Bojan. It was a very chilling story of how SLAPPs work in Serbia, but also I'm very hopeful for this journalistic solidarity and the approach you have in your country. And I was wondering whether Cecilia and Catherine had similar experience when it comes to journalist solidarity in their countries, and a connected question to that, like, to whom or where to journalists can go in your countries, or from your experience when a SLAPP case appear?
Okay. So different things. For example, have been invited to join Reporter Shields because we are OCCRP member centers too. And the reason why we haven't so far, and the reason why I haven't mentioned it, it's because of the let's say, situation that we have in Italy that is peculiar. As I said, like for us, the main issue at the moment, it's not the legal costs themselves, which fortunately, for example, with the help of ACPMF and other organizations who are managing at the moment to cover, the huge issue is more, it would be like an actual insurance in case we lose. And yeah, well, I won't get more into details, but we do, of course, one of the reasons also that OCCRP itself, it's supporting our legal costs in some foreign jurisdictions, because the cases that we have multi-jurisdictions are with OCCRP as a media. So, and obviously I'm talking about things that are ongoing and have been ongoing for years. And this case kind of started even before Reporter Shield was promoted and put together. So it's just that sometimes you get drugged for years and things. But obviously, I would suggest definitely to media organization to look into Reporter Shield, especially if they're reporting about multi-jurisdictional stories, especially if they're reporting on the UK, for example, or the United States. Because, for example, myself, I now with the case that we have in Florida, the judge went for discovery. So it's not only a problem of money, really, but it's also a problem of having some like a support of people that are in that jurisdiction and can help you understanding the different law systems, because it's not I mean, for me, discovery is something as an Italian, like we absolutely don't have something similar to that. In Italy, it's completely different. Like you are guilty until proven innocent, and you have to defend yourself, and it's a prosecutor that is trying to that is accusing you, and you have to prove yourself innocent. In the United States, it's the opposite. Like the slapper has to prove you guilty technically, right? So it's completely different. Cut the long story short, for us, we do, thank God, have different organizations or different networks that we belong to. It's very worth mentioning Reference Circle, that it's a self-organized network of independent European media. And for us, we're part of this circle, and it's very useful. We discuss non-editorial issues, but it's also very useful in terms of understanding, how your colleagues are doing it in that jurisdiction, and, taking inspiration against SLAPPs. But we're also a part of CASE Italy. So CASE is a network. Initially, it was a network of civil society organizations working to get better awareness and better policies and laws on SLAPPs. But for example, now in Italy, the Italian chapter has involved also some media, including us. And in there, we mainly work on advocacy rather than, the SLAPPs themselves. But I think it's also good because they, as a network, they bring also some, I would say, like the inspiration of this, for example, came from Kirk in Serbia, that they started inviting observatory to the trials. So when Case Italy invited us to join the network, we asked if they could also send observatories to our trials, be there physically in court, because we don't go, like our lawyers go, but we don't go. We are advised against being there, because one of the problems is that the criminals or those who slap us, how to explain, like a lot of it's revenge. It's not that they actually want that money or actually think that you have written something wrongly and they want you to correct a specific sentence. It's revenge. They want you in court and they want you to suffer sort of what, according to them, you're making them suffer, or the state made them suffer, or whatever. So they are waiting for you to show up in court and scare you. That's one of the things. So our lawyers usually advise against that, but then it becomes very important that a third body, like a neutral, third body, is there and is observing what's going on in court. So, for example, mentioning the collaboration between colleagues and inspiration, for us, Kirk has been very inspiring in that regard. And I hope we also have been useful in the years to perhaps other colleagues. So yes, it's very important to be in touch and in networks and to support one another, because that I don't think any of us feel being in competition to the others, like, oh, how many slaps do you have? Well, I have 10, or you only have 2, or whatever. It's actually more like, so sorry for what you're enduring. We feel the same, and let's, help each other out with support ideas, and even just knowing what's going on with the other colleagues. Also, because the judges seem to be very reluctant to understand what collaboration is among journalists. So one of the main issues is, for example, when one organization like OCCRP or what have you, or ICIJ, I don't know, just sends confrontations for all the partners in a consortium, that is very hard to explain to the judges in case of trial, that you as a media or as a journalist have done the correct confrontation, because it's been done through another organization. So I think that by being together, we can also help and bring in some kind of more revolutionary approaches. And when it comes to the directive against SLAPPs, for example, our ministry forgot. It was when terms were like 2 weeks ago. He forgot to act upon. So at the moment, we're in a situation in which, although Italy is fully in the European Union, has done nothing to actually apply the new anti-SLAPP directive. And it's very unclear because the Meloni, so our prime minister, said that according to her, the SLAPP problem in Italy does not exist. It only exists when there is multi-jurisdiction cases. But it's very unclear how they will even discover that there are multi-jurisdiction cases. Because, for example, I'm, as I mentioned, in one case that is in 4 jurisdictions, but it's not like the government contacted me, or it's not that the Italian court that is investigating me on that specific bit of that multi-jurisdiction case knows about what's going on in the rest of the courts. Like next week, I will have to give a deposition in Florida, and it will be upon us to bring to the court an update on the 3 other, trials or cases in Spain, France, and Italy. So the truth being, at the moment, there is no mechanism. So the Europe is telling you this is how you should be doing it, but then it's very unclear how the states will enforce that.
If I may add, just quickly, thanks, Cecilia, for sharing our best practices. I did mention at the beginning that in some instances we literally didn't have due process in the courtrooms because there were some powerful individuals that started suing us, and this is when I mentioned that we have a lawsuit by a Serbian judge, Court of Appeals judge, so a very powerful and influential one. So this is the case where, for example, we would invite observers. Some might say it's pressure on the judiciary, but no, this is more of a kind of encouragement for them to respect due process in courtrooms. And we see the change of the behavior of the plaintiffs, of the judge, because we really had cases where the judge wouldn't let us read the whole sentence from the article that we were sued for, but just, for example, insist on 3 words from there that are defamatory. So literally we've had these cases. So this is why we have to have witnesses that this is actually going on. And in this case, knock on wood, but I think so far, this has proven very effective. So this is something also. And then we invite other journalists, associations as well, but also OSCE mission in Serbia, we still have OSCE mission presence in Serbia, who has a really big mandate that includes kind of media regulation. And I think Tia, and I see her, she used to work for the mission. We have EU delegation that is very active, as well as embassies of some mostly European Union countries, such as the UK embassy, German embassy, Dutch embassy, and this is the people that we invite.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well, it's really inspiring to hear Bojan and Cecilia. I think, without solidarity, I certainly wouldn't have survived the SLAPP lawsuits against me. I mean, in the UK, it always seemed like it's a very isolating experience because you get these, horrifically long letters which are emblazoned with private and confidential. And you think, well, if you tell anyone or speak about it, then that means you're going to get sued even more. And I had no idea that this community existed when I first got sued by Abramovich. And there was a very good organization in the UK called the Foreign Policy Centre. And there's a very good woman who you're probably aware of, Susan Cuftry, who wrote me an email saying, "Do you want any help?" And I was horrified when I got that email originally, because I thought, well, I can't answer that, because if I write anything about this lawsuit in an email, then I'm going to have to hand it over in disclosure. Someone's going to distort something that I've written and it will be used against me. And so I didn't answer her for ages, because I thought, well, we've got a good case, we'll just fight it in court. And you're not even thinking that this could be something powerful. But luckily, eventually I did meet Susan, and I was just really kind of surprised and buoyed by, all the support. And when you have entities like PEN International and all these other journalistic protection organizations basically issuing a statement saying these are SLAPPs and these are the reasons why, it's really heartening, because prior to that it just felt like a really isolating, and you just think that you've done something wrong when you haven't, or anything that you say will be used against you. So I think this type of solidarity, it's obviously it's really important. And I think, journalists in the UK have been on a steep learning curve about what the SLAPPs are. But I think certainly now these networks are in place, and journalists now, instead of fearing to publish anything about their lawsuits, like Bojan, they're now kind of covering them, writing about them, publishing the ridiculously long legal letters that they get. And it's really important to continue doing so.
One thing I'd like to mention is that sometimes lately we have also been receiving requests of help from researchers. Like, for example, a research that we collaborated with, he's been now sued for something he published in his dissertation. And because he's been sued in Italy, he has no idea how to act upon and how to get a lawyer. So we provided our lawyer in that case. Like, obviously, we're not covering the cost, but he's gonna be treated as if he's one of our journalists. So in that, I think that's also very useful, like having a sort of enlarged network and knowing that us as media organization, not as just IrpiMedia, Kirk, and many others are also available to just have support, but also, find solutions like, do you know a good lawyer? You know a good and cheap lawyer, this kind of things. But also we helped a local newsroom in Sardinia getting a CMPF support to cover the legal expenses also. That was like last week. Because otherwise, like they wouldn't, because you need to somehow have an organization or people that are already known that tell ACPMF or other organization, yes, they're trustable. And that's also very important. I think the network of support goes both ways.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these horrifying stories and also some points on which we can have some hope for the future. There is a lot to be done, definitely, especially when it comes to systemic solutions that will just make it more hard and expensive for people to sue journalists, activists, or scholars. But it's good that we are in this ongoing discussion that allows us to move and push for things going forward. If you have any final remarks, we will be very happy to hear them. If not, thank you again.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for inviting me. I was very interested to hear all the stories of my colleagues and horrified to hear them. And I'm sorry for what they're going through. But I hope that, through such solidarity and through the work that you and others are doing, that hopefully one day we will beat these guys. But thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. So at this point, we will stop, and I hope you will have a perfect rest of the week, as it's just Monday.
Thank you, and thank you, Catherine. It was the same here. Very, very nice meeting you and hearing your story.
Yeah, great to hear.
Thanks on my behalf.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.